We, of course, want to have an interactive discussion. So if you have any question or comments you would like to share with the rest of us, please feel free to use the chat. You are all welcome to put your cameras on, but please keep yourself muted throughout the seminar. Just know that we will record these seminars. In case you don't want to be seen in the recording, we recommended you to deactivate your camera. We are also excited to see who is participating. So please write your name and organization in the chat.
And we also want to be interactive with those that might not be able to participate here today. So please use the hashtag #ShiftThePower when tweeting or sharing posts about the webinar. And to warm up and in the spirit of having some audience interaction, we would like to do a short survey with you before we introduce the panel. So please answer the following question in the chat. Why is shifting the power important? We'll give you a few minutes to answer, so please use the chat. Why do you think shifting the power is important? Don't be shy. I see everyone is busy presenting themselves and saying hi to everyone, so we'll give you a few minutes to do that, and also please share why it is important to shift the power. We have a first contribution to disrupt previous harms of colonialism. Very good. Anything else? Sustainability, ownership, and true partnership. It's a matter of social justice to expand locally led practice. Those are some of the, I see that there's coming in a lot of different comments now. Because people impacted by international development policies do not have a say in the decision making. Because decisions should with or very close to right holders and those who lead changes. Thank you. It's very interesting to see your comments, and please continue to share why you think shifting the power is important. I know that we're all very eager to get into the discussion, so continue sharing your perspectives and ideas, and we'll try to bring them into the discussion during this webinar. So with no further ado, we're all keen on getting started, and I'll try to start the presentation of this fabulous panel that we have here today. With us today, we have Amra Levniak, who is the program officer at the Civil Society Unit at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. Welcome, Amra. Thank you for joining us. We also have Gunjan Veda, who is a senior advisor for global collaborative research and public policy at the Hunger Project Canada and the Movement for Community-Led Development. Welcome, Gunja. We're thrilled to have you here.
We also have Nixon Chatre, founder and team leader of the Amani Initiative, and MCLD Uganda member. Welcome, Nixon. And finally, we have Eshvan Kwesiga, is a knowledge weaving and influencing manager at the Global Fund Community Foundation. Welcome, Eshvan.
And you will shortly get to see these people, not in real life because we are digital here, but I think we're just going to start with a round where we will get a clearer view and understanding of who is in the panel and what perspectives they have on the issue of shifting the power and ultimately the challenges to this topic. So we would like to start with you, Amra. Could you please set the stage from your perspective? What does shift the power mean for a governmental agency such as the Swedish International Cooperation Agency, and how are you working with shifting the power?
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here at this important event, and thank you so much to Hunger Project Sweden and the International Movement of Community-Led Development for organizing this event. So my idea is for me to dive into the pretty recently adopted DAC recommendation and how Sweden or SIDA is working with it, and why it is important for us in terms of, shifting the power. So as some of you perhaps know, the OECD DAC recommendation on enabling civil society in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, it was adopted by all 30 DAC members in July of last year. It focuses on the actions of donors and demands that donors improve their or our collaboration with and support to civil society so that the strategies, methods, approaches, and so on that we use are much more development effective. The recommendation is a legal instrument and a very valuable tool, as we all agree that Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals will not be achieved without the fundamental contributions from civil society. We see that civic space is shrinking and that democracy is backsliding globally. So this work is it's highly urgent. Also, the DAC recommendation is a common framework and a shared political commitment. It sets the spotlights on us as DAC members and donors, demanding from us that we scrutinize how we engage with and support civil society. And so that we make sure to improve policies, practices that today may even hamper CSO's ability to contribute effectively to Agenda 2030. Now, the overarching goal of the recommendation is for DAC donors to be much more development effective in our engagement with and support to civil society in the global South. It contains 3 pillars of work. 1, respecting, protecting, and promoting civic space. 2, applying development effective ways when supporting and engaging with civil society. And 3, incentivizing CSO own effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. The DAC recommendation also forces us to sort of walk the talk when it comes to our international commitments to the development effectiveness agenda. I think you all remember Paris, Accra, Busan, and so on, and how we have agreed to the 4 principles of local ownership, focus on results, inclusive partnerships, and transparency and accountability. So the overall aim of the recommendation is to better apply these principles and speed up our work in this regard. The recommendation takes off from the OECD study on DAC members and civil society from 2020, where several weaknesses were found, along with significant gaps between policy and practice, including imbalances in power relations and funding flows between northern and southern CSOs. So redefining power and partnerships with civil society, that is something that SIDA, together with other actors, of course, are currently addressing. The OECD, for instance, stated that 93% of all DAC CSO funding goes to DAC country domestic CSOs or international NGOs, while only 7% goes directly to CSOs in partner countries. We believe this is something that needs to change, and we think that the recommendation, the DAC recommendation, will assist us to improve these power and funding imbalances. Now, for our part, to implement this recommendation, SIDA has identified 3 sort of most important tasks when targeting civil society in partner countries and working with the human rights-based approach. So first of all, to support a pluralistic civil society as an objective in itself, in addition to supporting CSOs as independent development actors in their own right. And this also includes supporting movements and informal actors, CSOs' own think tanks, and so on. Number 2, more direct support and multi-year flexible, trust-based core support to partner country CSOs, acknowledging the capacity and skills that they have. And we have to make sure that it is support to and not through civil society actors. And number 3, much more dialogue and consultation with civil society at partner level. So that's sort of our intake into this and how we plan to embark on this journey. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Linu. Do you want?
Thank you, Amra. I'm very very happy to hear very concrete how you're working with this, and also how you're walking the talk, because that's something that we will get back to. And I think we'll also touch a little bit on the challenges later on. So we'll save that for later and move on to the next panelist to get an introduction.
Thank you, Amran. Thank you, Linu. So, well, we're going to move with Gunjan. So, Gunjan, as mentioned in your presentation, your work with the Movement for Community-Led Development. So, could you start by telling us a little bit about the movement? What is it, and what does shifting the power mean from your perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Ravi. It's wonderful to be here, even though it's a time when all of us are struggling and grappling with the reality of what is unfolding around us. So the Movement for Community-Led Development is an international consortium. It's a global consortium of 1,500 plus local civil society organizations and 70 INGOs, actually more than 70. So we're a very diverse group of people. We have local civil society organizations, community-based organizations from Liberia and Sierra Leone and Mexico. And then we have like the global INGOs, like the World Visions and Save the Children of the World. I see many of our members here, so a warm welcome to you all. What brings us together really is the shared commitment to put communities front and center in development. A commitment that was forged in 2015, the same day that the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the UN General Assembly. The Hunger Project is the global secretariat for the movement, but really the heart and soul of our movement are our national chapters. And these are organic groups of community-based organizations, local civil society organizations, the country offices of INGOs, researchers, basically in a country who come together and decide what they want to work on, but they also advocate for the devolution of power. They facilitate strengthening capacities to ensure that communities achieve their locally created visions and goals, right? You asked about what shifting the power means for us in the movement. Let me begin by saying what shifting the power is not. Shifting the power is not about people in DC and New York and London and Geneva and Stockholm deciding who is local and who is not local. It is not about them deciding whose lived experience matters, which is a lot of what the current conversation has become. Shifting the power really is about addressing the power asymmetries which exist in our world. And we are all seeing the tragic consequences of that, right, unfold before us. So it really involves for us unpacking two concepts. What is power and what is the shift that we are talking about, from where to where or who to who? Let me start with power. What is power? Well, we've all heard that power is money. Money is power, right? Like where the funder is, who the funder is dictates what happens with the money. And Amra quoted some statistics. We know that from 2018, less than 1% of the official development assistance went directly to local community-based organizations. And yet, we know more than anything, this pandemic has shown us that communities are the first responders in any crisis. Now imagine the change that would happen in our world if we change the way funding happens. If that funding was going directly to communities, to community-based organizations, to local organizations, the quantum of change. So absolutely, shifting the power is about shifting the money. But also, let us remember that funding and resources are not just about ODA. Resources exist in countries and in communities. And power is about much more than funding and resources. That's one component of it. But power is about voice. It's about influence. It's about decision-making. It's about who has a seat at the table, but it's also about the structure of the table. Who has created that table, right? And we all know that those tables, the structures, the institutions that we have are a legacy of colonialism. We know that they are based on systems of distrust, of mistrust, of the belief that people are beneficiaries who don't know how to solve their own problems, and somebody from outside has to come and help them. अगर मैं हिंदी में बात करने लगूं तो कितने लोगों को मेरी भाषा समझ में आएगी? How many people understood what I said right now? The very fact that I'm communicating in English, this event is happening in English, the language of our global conversations, the platforms on which these global conversations happen, there is a power dynamic there automatically. So power is about so much more than just funding. And what is the shift that we are talking about then? So we hear a lot recently, we've heard about shifting the locus of power, about shifting funding from DC or New York or Geneva to Nairobi and New Delhi, and that's great, that needs to happen. Yet we also know that power inequities within countries are sometimes even bigger than those between countries. So shifting the power to us happens at multiple levels. It has to happen within countries. That's why we talk of devolution. One of the goals in our movement is ensuring at least 20% financing for community finance, right? It's important. And yet communities are also not homogeneous entities. We know that there are discriminations and marginalizations that exist in power dynamic that exist within communities. Single women, people with disabilities, people from ethnic minorities with different sexual orientation, all of those, right? So there's also a need to shift power at the community level. In other words, to us, shifting the power is about ensuring that every person has a right to decisions, has a voice in decisions that affect their lives. It is about community-led development. It is about recognizing the power potential promise that exists in every community, and I would go so far as to say that exists in every individual. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gunjan, for telling us about what shifting the power is not and where does it start, right? So actually, I love it that you're talking about seizing power beyond power and the structural dynamics that are present beyond the financial ones. So for the other hand, thank you for your speaking about discrimination and the role it plays in the exercise of power over those groups that have historically been discriminated against. Perhaps you have give us some possible solutions in your intervention. I'm sure that later we will have more dialogue on. So, Lina, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Gunjan. I mean, it's great that the conversation about the complexity of shifting the power has already started. Thank you for doing that. And I think we'll go deeper into it in a later stage, but I'm also keen on hearing the rest of the panel and introducing them more thoroughly to all of you. So we'll go ahead and talk to Nixon. Nixon, are you there?
Yes,
well,
I'm here.
Welcome. You're actually the brains behind the Amani Initiative, a community-based organization in Uganda, and you're practicing community-led development every day. What has your involvement been in this conversation of shifting the power? And is shifting the power, has it been an inclusive discussion according to your experience?
Thank you very much. I just want, first of all, to appreciate my previous speakers for the amazing words they brought forward. Maybe just to go back to the question, Amani is a Lugbara word, which is spoken in of West Nile, which basically means hours. So in the design of our organization in 2011, around 10 years back, our focus then was to create a platform whereby the communities are able to take lead, first of all, in the design, in the implementation, in the monitoring to the issues they're facing. So that is one clear way that we began our involvement in the aspect of shifting the power, because in the design of the program, we believe that the community has a big role to play in that. Over the years, as part of our work, we've been able to strategically position ourselves in terms of being able to push the agenda. One clear platform of where we're able to converse or to this dialogue around these aspects is around the Charter for Change, which is an initiative that was brained out of the Grand Bargain launched during the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. We believe that to ensure that we practically talk about shifting power, there are three critical things that are of concern. First of all, is empowering the communities that we've been able to directly implement through our institution. One is around leveraging the available platforms. One key platform that has enabled us to do that is the Charter for Change, which is a global institution. In Uganda, we are made up of more than 100 organizations, local organizations. Our focus is to put a task international funders around the aspects of accountability in line with the Grand Bargain launched during the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. Maybe also one critical point of our conversation has been through the movement for community-led development chapter in Uganda. Under the chapter, we have over 40 organizations. One key space we're providing in that is to ensure that we collect the evidence from the communities, which verify that, yes, the communities have a role to play, and if we're empowered, able to do it. But also we mobilize like-minded institutions. We believe that if many of us are able to push the relevance of shifting the power, we're able to interest different stakeholders at a high level on what they're able to do. And lastly, it's around being able to work with the like-minded institutions, as clearly indicated. So basically, I think our current involvement is around that. First of all, in line with what we do, and in line with the evidence that needs to be put in place, because sometimes if we're talking about shifting the power, it's important to provide the evidence to justify the way that is required. And lastly, it's around leveraging the available structures available, one being the Charter for Change and Movement for Community-led Development, which are giving us the opportunity to discuss and present the issues around shifting the power. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nixon, and thank you for giving us clear indications on how you can bridge the gap between like high-level discussions and communities and their involvement in this. So we'll also get back to those aspects of the conversation in a little while. Robbie, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nixon. I love it, your reflection about the importance of the evidence. So I think it's really, really, really important to choose to take some decisions in the political spaces. So, well, we want to move with Eshban. So welcome again, Eshban. So we are thinking in some questions. So the first one is, what is a knowledge weaver for you? On the other hand, a big part of the conversation of shifting the power has been focused on how to shift the money. Can you tell us more about community philanthropy and how it plays into shifting the power? So go ahead, Eshban.
Yeah, so community philanthropy is really the simple idea that communities, especially communities in the Global South, exist and have their own resources that they use to contribute to their development challenges. Sometimes these resources present themselves as money or cash. Sometimes it's in-kind contributions, and it also extends to things such as social capital, all of which come together, I think, to form an interesting cocktail of all the elements and circumstances needed for development to happen. So community philanthropy essentially makes the case that it is not true that development resources only come from the global north. And our strategy has been to use community philanthropy as a long-term approach to shifting power. So the knowledge weaving, which is really the title that I hold at, the Global Fund for Community Foundations, is really premised on the idea that within development, you have the so-called mainstream international development aid, which is the dominant system that has existed for a long time and which I think many of us are quite familiar with. But within that, out of the cracks and faults of that dominant system, we start to see organizations and individuals who are thinking about development differently and acting in different ways, who are reforming it, yeah, so to speak. And this is what we call these are what we call the emergent practices, or some of the emergent organizations. You might remember that for a long time within the electric car, which has now become fairly mainstream, came out as an emergent practice within the mainstream automobile industry. So just like in the development industry, we have emergent practices, organizations, and people that are reimagining the system and doing things differently. So the work of a knowledge weaver is to really curate the experiences and stories of these organizations and these actors that are doing things differently, to start to weave, a coherent or a consistent narrative, that paints a picture of how different things could be. So really, we are weaving, a beautiful new cloth or an alternative system for the rest of us to see and to reimagine development.
Thank you, Eshban, and thank you for sharing from a vision of the global South. So you invited us to think and rethink how power dynamics are structured and who participates in them, and thank you for that. So,
yes, thank you, Eshban. It's very interesting to hear your perspective and also what kind of long-term solutions there are connected to what you were saying about community philanthropy. So thank you for that. I think we have gotten a sense of who we have here, these four fabulous panelists. And I think we're all ready to dive into the discussion. And as I said earlier, please feel free to have an interactive discussion. We don't want to have presentations per person. We want to communicate in an interactive way, and we also want to try to weave in some of the questions raised in the chat. So we'll go ahead and start with one of the questions that already has been kind of pinpointed in some of your comments, and it's around the challenges. The theme of this seminar is challenges to shifting the power. And I mean, Gunjan, you were talking about some of the power imbalances or inequities in countries. We're also talking about the shifting money versus shifting powers. What are your, from your point of view, the challenges to shifting the power really concretely? Eshban, would you like to start?
So I think that the beauty with shift the power is that it means different things to different people, depending on where you sit in the ecosystem. So when the hashtag emerges in 2016 at the Global Summit for Community Foundation, it really started as an articulation that a lot of what gets accepted and validated within the development world is really defined by who has power. But since then, it has grown into a manifestation of the frustrations and aspirations of people within the development world, especially people in the global South who acknowledge that a lot of power is held in the global North. And it's essentially organizations and people saying that the system that exists now is not inclusive. It's very exclusionary. It is racist. It is dismissive of experiences and knowledge that is not generated in the global South, and that it has not worked for them. So it's organizations and people just redefining and reimagining a new system in which they can coexist and or in which they can exist, and that looks differently for different people. But specifically on challenges, I think that one of the things that we see is this idea that shift the power is really about shifting the money, and like Gunjan really said at the beginning of this, that it goes way beyond that. We're trying to shift power, not to shift money, and that the danger of focusing it on money could easily create a situation where where power moves from London, or it moves from Washington and it moves to Kampala or New York.
Thank you, Eshban. I just wanted to touch base on that. We have a comment and also some thoughts from the audience, and I want everyone to continue participating, but we have a question connected to this, what you're talking about. And I would love to hear our presenters' thoughts about how the organizations manage deconstruction. I think shifting the power encompasses the painful but necessary step of deconstruction, deconstructing paradigms, deconstructing trust relationships, etc. And as the saying goes, one cannot make an omelet without breaking some eggs. So I think that's also something that you're touching upon. it's not only about shifting the money, but shifting relationships, paradigms. And I think I would like Gunjan to come into the discussion with your perspective. You have already touched upon this, but what are your thoughts on what Espen has said, but also what the challenges are?
Absolutely. So I think the reason why shifting the power is so difficult is because what it really is about shifting a mindset. And the challenge is that we are trying to use the same frames to shift a mindset that was created and is a legacy of those frames of reference, right? And that's the most difficult part, because it's a painful process. It's, as Conte pointed out in his comment, it's painful because it requires a reflection. It's a reflection of what is it we are doing. It's a reflection of, it requires questioning our fundamental beliefs about ourselves, about the world that we live in. And it's so prevalent, that we don't even notice it. It's in the vocabulary that we use. It's in the way that we think. It's in the structures that we, create, as I said earlier. So to give an example, why is this so difficult? And Amra, I am not, I hope I'm not presuming too much, and I don't know about CEDA, but from conversations with a lot of developmental and bilateral organizations, for instance, who are trying to say that, even if it's about shifting funding, they want to shift the funding, but they have a fundamental challenge. And the fundamental challenge is that organizations and funders are accountable to the taxpayers for their money, right? And so that's why they create these processes and systems which are extremely complicated and are designed as ways to ensure that the money is going where it should be going. But what is that based in? That's based in this fundamental belief somewhere that people in certain parts of the world or certain kinds of organizations are less trustworthy, right? So it requires a lot of introspection on our parts of what does this mean? And, I think that goes to Conte's point around it requires a lot of reflection and thinking on our parts of what are we thinking of? And, as an organization, how are we dealing with it? In the movement, for instance, we've been trying over the last couple of years, we realized that language is a barrier. It's a very real reality. It's a reality of our world, how it obstructs and, and it inhibits and it dictates who is able to participate and how, so can we introduce translations? What can we do? I don't think we have perfect solutions. I think we are still trying. I think, we haven't, but just the recognition of that is the first step. So I think what makes this so challenging really is the fact that it requires that shift in mindset, and it's difficult, but there are solutions. And I'm just going to end with this. I read this beautiful article by a Nigerian physician who works in global health, is based in the US, called Ijoma Opara. And one of the things I personally struggle with is the terminology of global north and global south. And I don't know how to get around it because I actually don't have another word for it. And in her article, she suggested, she used the word majority world. And I realized she is so right, because actually, if you think about who we call the global south, they are the majority population. That is the majority. We are the majority world in some ways. And yet how that one reference completely flips how we're thinking about it. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Gunjan. And Amra, I wanted to go directly to you to comment on what Gunjan has said and also reflect on has CEDA the possibility to shift their mindset? Is that something that can happen in a governmental agency?
Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Gunjan. Very important and interesting remarks. So in terms of challenges, in December, we, CEDA, invited Dylan Matthews, the CEO for Peace Direct, to present findings from their report, Time to Decolonize Aid, in one of our seminars. And in one of his slides, he said, and this is a quote, "In trying to shift power and resources in the system in favor of local efforts, we have encountered significant resistance, with excuses ranging from local actors cannot be trusted, they lack capacity, local civil society doesn't exist in this or that region. The risk of fraud or funds going into the wrong hands is too great, and local groups cannot meet our strict compliance requirements, and so on. And he ended this slide by saying that, and this is also a quote, "The root of much of this resistance lies in overt and structural racism, which is barely acknowledged by those in the system." I mean, perhaps he's right, but what can be said is the challenges we face now, there are a few. For instance, how do we embark on this journey of a self-critical power analysis without arousing fear and a sense of threat to the ones in the system who now have power and privilege? How can we raise the issue of trust, which is what Gunjan was referring to earlier? Who do we trust? Who do we not trust? Why? And also the issue of capacity building. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? What does it mean? Capacity for donor compliance or capacity to contribute to structural change? And when is it finalized? When do, well, I don't want to use Global South, majority world CSOs, when do they graduate from this capacity building? Yeah, so there are a few large questions that need to be answered. And yeah, those are some of the challenges that we see. Thank you.
Nixon, would you like to comment on the challenges or on something that some of the panelists have said?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Two issues are picked from the conversation. One is the issue of the mindset. Maybe in line with the issue of what could be missing in the conversation. 1 year ago, I had an opportunity of being part of a roundtable discussion under the Charter for Change, whereby we had the donor community as well as grassroots organizations. Our key discussion around that was the issue of localization of humanitarian aid. One key critical issue that I thought was missing out of the discussion was how do we coexist? I understand that sometimes when someone talks about shifting the power, the first thing is that, of course, if I'm powerful, I'm giving powers to someone else. So in literally, that's what it would mean. So the key issue that we felt that is missing in that conversation is that how do we discuss shifting the power in line with coexistence? Because that aspect of if you don't put in place coexistence, then it will always be a song to talk about shifting the power, because those who have the power maybe will not want to leave that power to someone else. So basically, the issue of being able to discuss how do we coexist, what is the validation between the grassroots institutions and well as the funding institutions. So I'm sure you will have that discussion to ensure that we're able to avoid the issue, the challenges we are facing at the moment. It is around the mindset, as clearly indicated. Of course, the funding institutions always believe that the local actors may not have the capacity. That's around the aspect of transparency. So something which also need to be worked upon. Maybe also as part of my conclusion is around the engagement of the government. As you all know that most of the institutions, local institutions, are usually guided by the government recommendations. For instance, in Uganda, we have the NGO Act. Under the NGO Act, it usually guides in different factors around developmental work. So I'm thinking that if the government directly takes part in these conversations as well, then it is easier to put or to engage the different funding partners to look into grassroots institutions as part of their funding stream. So basically, I think I would want to close with there, but just the echo of mindset is very critical. The issue of transparency is very critical, but also discussions around coexistence as part of the shift in the power discussion, because if that is not discussed, then it will always be a challenge in terms of shifting the power. It will always remain something that will be discussed and talked about, but action will always not be able to come through. Thank you.
Thank you, Nixon, and thank you all of you for sharing and for actually putting a focus on this coexistence. And I had a question about, because we're talking about very intrinsic power relations, we're talking about colonial past and colonial structures that are still very much alive and breathing. And is one of my questions that pops up when we talk about this, and especially when we talk about coexistence. Who needs to adjust to what, and who do you think, like shifting the power movement and decolonization of development, who is it really for today, and who should it be for in the future? Who would like to start? Nixon, go ahead, please.
Maybe I would start with that. I read something around what does decolonization literally mean. Basically, it is around reclaiming what was taken and honoring what will still have to be taken. So in my experience, in my expertise, in terms of development, in terms of basically basic development, if it's around reclaiming something was taken, I believe that the first thing that may come across someone's mind that, yes, we need to get this money from the Europeans because they took from us this kind of things. But I'm talking about issues that affect the community. It's not about just what, it's not, basically it looks like we're entitled to aid, which I think may not be the case. The case is that we want to create change in our communities. And the best way to create it is by empowering the people who know the problems they're facing. So if we're talking about decolonization around shifting the power, then there's a way we are losing the focus of what we're trying to talk about, because basically it is taking us back to the colonial time, something that we need to start to think, how do we get out of that and think about the key purpose of the aid, it being able to help the communities and basically discuss who needs to be involved and how they need to be involved. So basically I think that the movement is for all of us, because if at all that everyone is empowered, then there's the opportunity for sustainable development, which directly affects each one in place. So basically it is for both the donor institutions as well as the local actors who need the solution. Thank you very much.
Eshban, would you like to comment? And I also want to acknowledge that you shared a link about capacity building and the view upon capacity building. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, just first on the link. This was a piece that was written on shiftthepower.org, which is a platform we like to call the Treehouse, which is where we curate the stories and experiences of people within the movement and organizations that are doing things or doing development differently. And this was a reflection from one of our partners based in Uganda, an organization called Civil Collective, who essentially makes the case that a lot of the capacity assessments have no bearing on local realities. And in future, whenever any of us get a time, it would be a good read. Specifically on decolonization, who is decolonization for? I think that for me, decolonization is about justice. So in thinking about this question, I have to ask myself, who is justice for? And I think that justice is for everybody. Everybody deserves justice. We also have to remember that in history, colonialism. I'm just going to move a little bit from the sun. Yeah, we also have to remember that in history, colonialism was not spread by distributing hugs, chocolate, kisses, and flowers. It was a very violent and very abusive process that was used to maintain power. And within the context of development aid today, the colonial legacy that exists today also still maintains some power. If you go to this platform, the Treehouse, we have a series called Unmute Yourself that allows for individuals and organizations to contribute their reflections on shift the power, but to do it anonymously. And the reason why it's important to do it anonymously is to create that psychological safety and to allow for people to speak up without having to worry about the consequence of power coming down with them on punishment. And this punishment can easily come down on you, regardless of whether you're white or non-white, because when you start to articulate and challenge the system that exists, it will push back. So I think that the decolonization movement is for everybody, because I think that the colonial legacy delegitimizes many of the global North individuals and actors that mean well. It delegitimizes them and their good intentions and their contribution. But the colonial legacy also erodes dignity for the people in the global South that are still trying to do development and are trying to reimagine their communities. And if we're going to have to reimagine the development world as it is now, we definitely have to decolonize. And it cannot just be the actions or acts of people in the global South or formerly colonized territories. It has to be the actions of everybody. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Eshban. And thank you for putting this very important issue that it's for everyone. And the question is also, if it's for everyone, is everyone participating in the discussion? And that's something that I think is a big challenge. And we are kind of running out of time, so I wanted to start focusing on the solutions, because we have identified a lot of challenges and you have already mentioned some of the solutions, but I would like us to go deeper into that so that we can end on a very positive and have some clear tools to take with us from this conversation. I don't know if Gunjan, could you start sharing some solutions to these challenges that you have identified?
I think first I do want to, before I get into that, I really want to acknowledge, what Ashban said about, how decolonization is for each of us, and also recognizing that there are people in, the majority, recognizing the violence that has been perpetrated and continues to be perpetrated against the majority world, but also recognizing that, there are people and there is violence which is happening as a result of this on people in, what we typically call the global north as well, right? So the need to do that. And I think that kind of comes back to Nixon's point around, this is not a zero-sum game. This is not about my loss and your gain, or your loss and my gain. This is about truly ensuring that we are talking about equitable partnerships, right? And to me, that's also where the solution is moving towards. And what does a true and equitable partnership require? A true and equitable partnership requires, for each one of us, right? It doesn't matter where we are in this ecosystem. It doesn't matter whether we have the resources and the funding that we are offering organizations, whether we are a community-based organization, whether we are an INGO or a government for that matter, right? It requires us to think critically about, going back to Conte's point, about how do we view the other people and the other parts in the ecosystem, the different parts of the ecosystem. Do we value the knowledge? Do we value their agency? Do we value their resources, the capacities that exist within that, right? Or do we believe that because somebody is educated in a certain kind of institution in a certain country and comes with a certain background, they are more qualified? So I think the solutions first lies with each of us starting that process of introspection. At an organizational level, it starts with recognizing just the change in rules and funding patterns will not be sufficient, because what they're going to create then is clones of, it's turning CBOs into clones of INGOs actually. So what it requires is, and that's why the voice part is so important, that the communities, the community-based organizations, the local organizations have to be a part of the policy making, have to be a part of the decisions around how funding flows, around policies, not just around funding, right? Overall. So I think that's the second part, examining every time we are creating a policy, a program, a process, who is there, who is deciding what these policies are and what they are. And then there's some very simple things around language, for instance, like I said, can we as organizations at least make sure that every time we are doing events, we may try and make attempt to, and I know how difficult it is, I know how challenging it has been from us, and we haven't been able to do it everywhere, but can we just try to make sure that, we make translations available, that we don't, that, people are not able to participate or be speakers because they don't speak certain languages? Can we make materials available and accessible, not just language, but accessibility? So simple things like that, I think can be steps. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gunjan. I think we'll go right to Amra to share some solutions.
Thank you. I just have to echo what has already been said. It is absolutely crucial that we embark sort of on a journey of self-critical power analysis, although it may be, difficult. And we also, we have to keep talking about power and power relations. and keep these discussions alive and make sure they just don't fade amongst other, themes that are on the agenda. So I very much echo what has already been said. It's important to think critically about how we view people and how we view partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Amra. Nixon, would you like to share?
Thank you very much. I think basically as part of a solution, what we can move forward with, the first thing is that let's keep on this conversation. I think sometimes if we speak and speak, maybe it may turn into action. I mean, also the issue of being able to leverage the current existing structures. Within our space, we've been able to, through the different structures we've created, I've seen a lot of funding strictly focused on the grassroots institutions. Maybe that is out of because of the current structures that are available. So I think that we need to continue identifying those structures and pushing for them to ensure that they're able to put into practice the aspect of shift the power. As an institution, we've benefited from some of those structures. So the issue is that they exist. So it's an opportunity for us to continue identifying them, continue uplifting them to ensure they continue doing the work they're doing. And maybe lastly, the issue of the coexistence. I think I would always reaffirm that, because when someone speaks about shifting the power, the next thing that where's my power going? And I'm sure no one in this world would want to leave out their power. So I think it's important for us to put into practice and dialogue aspect of how best are able to coexist to ensure that that we don't make shifting the power as a big elephant to some of the institutions. And lastly, I think the issue of the government involvement, especially at the grassroots level, I think it's important for different governments to be brought into this discussion, because I know that if, for instance, in Uganda, we have something called BUBU, Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. So basically in that aspect, for any project that is supposed to be happening in the country, there must be a percentage that's allocated to the local area where the project is being implemented. So I believe that if our governments are brought into these conversations, then through that simple shift in policy, they're able to enable international institutions to think through the opportunity of leveraging or working together with local grassroots organizations. So basically, those are my recommendations on how we can practically bring into shifting the power from talk to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nixon. And we have been receiving a lot of questions and comments, but I would like to include Eshban in the conversational solutions before we go into that. Eshban, could you share some of your ideas on solutions or what you are already doing?
Yeah, so I'd like to speak from the vantage point of community philanthropy. We sometimes get told that community philanthropy will replace foreign or external funding, and therefore, render external funding irrelevant or unnecessary. And I just want to say that what we want to do, or what we want people to understand, is that community philanthropy provides it's a different kind of funding. It's a different kind of funding to external funding. It's not meant to substitute or to replace. But what it also does is that it legitimizes local actors, especially within the civil society space. In my own country, Uganda, a lot of the civil society, human rights, democracy organizations, have been criticized as being actors or foreign agents because all their resources come from external actors. And what community philanthropy does is that it shows that no, actually, some of these resources come from local actors who are interested in seeing this change, and they are communicating that through contributing their own resources to the change process. Having said that, I think that we also need to look at some of the experiences, and probably we need to look at some of the experiences of other organizations, especially big funders, that have contributed to shift the power within the context of local resources. The Dutch Foreign Affairs Ministry recently supports a program called Giving for Change that's contributing towards shift the power. In the Philippines, we have USAID working with a consortium of organizations to contribute to building local resources. I think that more recently, the FCDO is also working with Comic Relief to also contribute to shifting the power in very practical ways. So I think that there are already emerging examples that we can look at of individuals and organizations that have gone beyond the conversations. And lastly, to say that an ecosystem exists of several organizations and several organizations with emergent practices who are reimagining this whole game. And it's important for us to support that ecosystem.
Thank you, Eshban, also for giving us that reminder that there are already actors doing this. And thank you all of you for sharing solutions, not only from your own perspective as an organization, but also on the individual level, on governmental level, on different levels. I think we all have more inspiration on how we can do change in our own selves, but also what change we can act for as organizations and ask for. Roberto, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Lino, thank you. Actually, we have a lot of questions, but for the time, we need to choose one or two. So I will choose the first one to the panel. So please feel free to respond. The first one is, how easily can shifting power be done even in a small unit? How about the big team players, supporters? So this is the first question. And the second could be designing international guidelines to be followed within the development cooperation in order to officially provide aid funding in the first place. So I think that we can start with those both questions, Lino, if you are agree for the time. So panel, we have like 3 minutes to respond these both questions. Who want to start? Amra, Gunjan, Nixon, Eshban.
I can start with the last question with the guidelines, and yeah, I think that sort of that has to be a part of this sort of self-critical reflections that we make, because we are aware of the fact that funding is in the first place it's not accessible to many actors due to the guidelines and the processes. I mean, it is an administrative, it is a heavy process to even apply for funding from the larger donors. So yes, so it's in a very, I mean, I will take this with me. It's important to also look at our sort of routines and the guidelines and so on, and also think about who are we as donors accountable to. I mean, is it the rights holders and the majority world, the ones who are sort of the stakeholders, or is it to our own taxpayers? And this sort of control compliance versus results. I mean, that is something, yeah, that we really have to think more about. Yes.
Thank you so much, Amra. So who next?
Thank you very much. Maybe let me try to respond to the first question, just to repeat to ensure that I got it right. Or was it around how can shift the power be in line with the small units? I don't know, maybe to be clear on the question. It was the question around shifting the power in line with a small unit. Was that right? Just to confirm that before. So basically, yes, I think I want to speak within my experience as being a small unit. We being a grassroots institutions, what have we been able to put in place? I understand that shifting the power is from the different levels. There's the donors, there's the government structure, but also the smallest units of the structure, who is the grassroots organization. So one thing we've been able to integrate within our work to ensure that we put into practice shifting the power is in line with our values, is in line with our approach to development. So basically, we try as much as we don't try, we ensure that our implementation is driven by the communities. In that way, we are directly shifting the power within what we can control. So basically, it starts with your vision, your mission, your values, and the way you do your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nixon. So, Gunjan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just very quickly to, and also I think it takes into, I want to also address a couple of other things which I think are very interesting, which have come up in the chat and in what the conversation has been. So, there was this question around what can we do as larger NGOs, and should we encourage others also to think about reducing their power? And there was these really important points that I think Caroline, if I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, brought up about the challenges for for the smaller community-based organizations and youth organizations, on the new actors and getting funding. And I think that's what Amara spoke to, about recognizing that so much of it is around compliance and risk, and which makes it very difficult. So I think there are examples. There are smaller foundations that we've heard of, which have tried to create systems which make this funding accessible, which have kind of tried to simplify the process that already exists. It's not easy, but we also know recently USAID has tried to kind of come up with something around this with the policy on, with the new policy on local capacity development. What the process will be and how much of it is actually going to make it accessible for CBOs and others remains to be seen. But there are things happening. And so I want to take us back to Eshpan's point about connecting the dots in the ecosystem. That there is a lot of momentum, there is a lot of ideas which are already taking place in different parts of the ecosystem. And if we can bring them together, there is definitely a way to have policy and guidelines which are better informed. But to also give ourselves, I think what's very important in all of this process is to have an appetite for failure. Systems are not perfect. I don't think institutions can be perfect. We expect, and yet we expect communities, CBOs, and even aid agencies to come up with perfect systems. And we have to recognize that they will not be. But if we can learn from the ecosystem, if we can make sure that the process is inclusive and that the voices that should be there, which is the community voices, are there, then we can at least come up with pilots, with processes, when we can try processes that are at least going to try and shift the power, which may or may not be successful. So I think that appetite for failure is extremely important. And finally, to the question around, Nixon already talked about what small units can do, but I think these consortiums that we represent and we create, right? And that we know that there's so many consortiums that exist and networks that are coming up. In the majority world, in different countries, there are consortiums, near network, there's so many of them that exist, of different Charter for Change. The Global Fund for Community Foundations has, there is a whole network of organizations there. The movement itself, our national chapters. If we can design the guidelines in a manner that allow local, national consortiums and networks to come together and access the funding, I think it would address some of the issues that we have in the shorter term around compliance and risk. At the same time, broaden up the space and ensure that we have the right voices out there. So.
Thank you so much, Gunjan. So finally, Eshban, do you want to add something or?
Yeah, I just want to say that we have the Shift the Power Manifesto, which are not guidelines, but points for inspiration for organizations, corporations that want to think about this differently. What I'll just do is that I'll just share a link in the chat. And some of them include some of the points that have been talked about, the issue around language, the issue around capacity, the issue around inclusivity. Yeah, so the 9 points of the Manifesto for Change, please take a look at them whenever you want. Again, they're not guidelines, they're meant to provide inspiration as opposed to standards.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, panel. So actually, we have the last questions. So what follows after this call for you personally and for the Shift and for the Shift the Power movement? How do we make sure this conversation does not stay just as a conversation? Please keep it short for 1 minute to respond, just in 1 minute, and thank you so much. Who wants to start? Maybe we can start with Nixon.
Thank you very much. So basically, what does it mean to me? I think I would speak in 2 perspectives. The first one is around my capacity as a chairperson for the Movement for Community-Led Development, Uganda chapter. I think one critical thing is to present to my members around what we've been able to discuss and use it as part of guidelines in what we can do to push for the agenda for shifting the power. But yes, I think that's one thing I'm going to pick from here. The beauty is that I have my members also on the call, so I'm able to leverage some of the learnings from here and integrate them within our mandate as a chapter, since that's one of our key deliverables. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Is anybody else? So do you want to follow maybe Amra?
Can you please repeat the question, Roberta? My internet
sure.
connection.
Yeah, sure. What follows after this call, your personally and for the Shift the Power movement, how do we make sure this conversation does not stay just as a conversation?
For us, for us, it is the work with the new DAC recommendation. It sort of makes us, as I said, walk the talk and working more development effectively. And also very important for us is to keep these discussions alive and, for it to not fade. And for instance, we are planning to organize a seminar later this spring on the topic of power shift. So now that we have a mentor, we need to sort of get actors on board. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amra. Gunja, do you want to say something?
I think for us, next steps is really, we are very actively this year in the movement trying to see how do we connect the dots. So reaching out to different other players, parts of the ecosystem who are working on it to see what can we learn from each other and how can we strengthen this movement together. So that's one part of it. And the second part of it is just seeing how can we integrate some of the tips and things that have come into our own practice. Because we really have to practice what we are saying. So that's where we are headed. And so we are trying to rethink the way we do a lot of the way we function, the way we consult, the way we work and create.
Yeah, thank you. Really thank you, Gunjan, for that. So finally, Eshban, do you want to say?
Yeah, so I see at least three layers. The first is, what we can all do within our individual and personal lives, connections that we have at work to contribute towards shifting the power and advancing this conversation. That's the first. The second is to say that we've been trying for some time now to build the momentum around organizations and people articulating themselves from their various vantage points. So we have a platform called shiftthepower.org, which is really a community resourced and community-led platform. So I'm bringing this up now to just say that it has really emerged as a platform for all of us within the ecosystem and within the movement to share our thoughts, our reflections, and our insights, and to speak up on these issues that would possibly also embolden other people to speak up as well and to build momentum around it. So I'm just going to share my email here for anyone that might be interested in contributing an article or a piece to the platform, as well as taking a turn at curating the content, because it is a community platform. So we've been trying to encourage several organizations to come up and take a turn at curating some of this content.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Esvan. Thank you for all of you. It was a really pleasure to be here and listen to you. Thank you. Linu?
Yes, time flies by fast when you're having fun. And I don't know about you, but I could listen to you all for hours. But unfortunately, time has run out. And I want to just acknowledge that there have been a lot of comments and questions that we haven't had time to answer. So if the panel could maybe in a few seconds, I know it's too much to ask for, but look through and see if you have any answers. And also if you can share any of the invites. For example, Amra, you were talking about a seminar on this later on. Please do so with the rest of the audience, or if you can share it with us and we'll share it afterwards. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panel, especially for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom. It was a delight listening to you. Thank you to the audience for joining us. We're so happy to have such a rich and fruitful conversation together with you, and for having such a broad representation in the audience. We hope that we all now can take this conversation into practice, and that we all have something that we can bring with us to our daily work. and also that so that we can reimagine development. So thank you once again to the panel. Thank you, Robbie, for co-moderating this session with me. And thank you to all participants for participating and commenting. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Lena, there is a question for you in the chat about the recording being shared.
Yes.
Links.
Yes, we will share the link to the recording afterwards to all who have been registered. And we will also upload it to our YouTube. So we'll send the link to everyone. Thank you. So if the panel just stays for a little bit.